Welcome everyone to today's panel discussion, how to manage fraud risks and reap the benefits of SMS text messaging. I am joined today by Michael Thomas, Vice President of Marketing at Greater Nevada Credit Union, Phul, Chief Information Security Officer here at Digital Onboarding, Jen Packard, our Chief Product Officer, and Stessa Cohen, who is Strategic Advisor, Consultant, and Evangelist at Pivot Assets. Stessa is going to be moderating our conversation today. Before I turn it over to her, I just wanted to say a couple things. First off, you've probably noticed that this session is being recorded. You're going to receive a copy of the recording via email before the end of the week. You may have questions throughout the discussion. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to enter your question, and we'll either address it during the conversation, but we're also going to save some time at the end to make sure we get to all of the questions. So with that, I'm going to welcome our panelists, and I'm going to let Stessa Cohen take it from here.
Hi, welcome everyone to this, what promises to be a very exciting discussion about text messages and how financial institutions can leverage them for better customer engagement and experience. Well, banks and credit unions are starting to leverage text messaging and they're reaping the benefits. Why? Well, you've probably gotten a text message this morning from a doctor or a store or some other business about some important event or information, whether it's to confirm an appointment or do something else. In fact, Gartner reported that 98% of people read, 98% of text messages are read, which is nearly 5 times the average email open rate. So obviously there are benefits, but unfortunately, there are also scammers, fraudsters, and other criminals who are making things tricky for financial institutions to move forward with this new channel. Customers and members aren't always sure if text messages are legitimate, and I'm sure risk management and security folks are wary of the cost to the institution. But people do want their banks and credit unions to use text messaging to deliver the important information they need. And of course, there's some wariness inside the institutions. So today we're going to address 3 aspects of this discussion. How are banks and credit unions using text messaging to drive engagement? What is smishing and how should your institution respond if you're attacked? And what are the best practices for using text messaging? And how can you start tomorrow to incorporate this into your marketing and customer communications? Okay, so let's start with the first topic around why should banks and credit unions text message customers and members?
Yeah, so I'll kick that off, Stessa. Thank you so much, and I'm so happy to be here and talk with the panelists and everyone who joined today. So really, why banks and credit unions should use text messages for their customers and members? Well, the first reason is it works. This channel of communication and engagement is working. We have an engagement platform. What we have seen through text messaging is an average of a 29% lift in click-through rates from text over emails. That's huge, right? If we look at, that's overall on our entire platform, but designated use cases or case studies, 50% of customers opted into text messages within a campaign. So this is showing us they want this type of communication. They want this type of engagement. This is how they want to communicate with you. I'm opting into this. 83% of campaign engagement on a mobile device. This is another thing. They're on their mobile device constantly. I read somewhere Americans check their phone on average 96 times a day. That is insane. Like, our phone is attached to our hand. I don't know what we did without it before, but we can't live without it today. And stats like that are just unreal, right? We're on our phones, we have our phones in our hand, and that those types of stats really show that. 95% of text messages are read within 3 minutes. Another one to just show it's on us constantly, right? We obviously have a problem, but it's there. Another thing too is 6 out of 10 consumers in a study with thousands of consumers answered texts that they want texts from businesses, and they are reading that within 5 minutes of receiving it. So that's really big from an engagement perspective. You're not getting that on email. You have to log into your email. Some people get it on their phone as well. Again, our phones are in our hands constantly, but just the fact that they're opening them and reading them within 5 minutes of getting them from a business. And I think, when we look at financial institutions, I feel like banks and credit unions really have an advantage here. They have an advantage because you're the person, the institution, the business that is controlling our money, right? You have our money. That's really important. And I'm going to hold that at a higher sense of importance than other retailers, right? You're my source of money, potentially as well. So I think that's really big. So yeah, it works. Consumers want it. And it's great because, automatically banks and credit unions have that higher sense of importance.
But isn't there a conflict with the email, and isn't it just too much overload? I mean, we already do email. We're constantly contacting, in many cases, our customers and members. Isn't this just going to annoy them and make our emails less important? And Michael, Mike, you can address this as well. I mean, I think that might be a concern.
Yeah, well, Stessa, I'll start, and I do think Jennifer did a great job of kind of setting up. So I want to make sure as you go through this conversation, it is not really a debate in my mind if credit unions and banks should use SMS and text messaging. What really for us was the awakening, and just a little bit of background. So I'm the vice president of marketing for the largest credit union in the state of Nevada. We are just about to hit our 75th anniversary. So we've gone through many of these technology rides in the past. We have about 83,000 members. Our field of membership is anywhere within the great silver state of Nevada, which I do have to put a plug in for tourism. It is starting to snow out here. So if you want to come out and visit us out in Reno, Tahoe, we'd always be happy to welcome you. But in all seriousness, we have started to use text messaging, and it's a great convenience. It is absolutely something that people want. But I think if you don't go into the usage of text messaging with maybe a wider view of just what you said, Stessa, how did text messages get in the way of existing communication? What are some of the things that fraudsters are doing right now to make our members very confused? And how important is it to consistently communicate to both your members or your customers how you're going to use text messaging, and realize, I think sometimes in marketing, we have a lot that we have to communicate. We sometimes confuse that, like, well, we've already said that story. Well, we realize, we have hundreds, if not thousands of new members or customers joining our organization. What does the process look like to walk them through onboarding? We are, in full disclosure, a customer of Digital Onboarding, and we are constantly trying to figure out how do we weave in education into our normal account process. So, members and customers know what to expect. So I think for all of the power of it, it is great. And we're going to talk through the lessons that we learned. But I will just say this. I saw a stat that stuck out to me. On average, a person will receive 19 spam texts per month. That's a lot. And, we kind of gotten into the habit now of sort of, deleting them. But what we found is a lot of the things we say beware of, the fraudsters are getting very good at figuring out not to do those things again. So we'll share that, Stessa, as we get into it. But I just want to, state my biggest lesson as everybody's thinking about this is I don't think it's a debate of whether you should do texting. It's, the preferred form. And you joke about email. I have teenagers in my house. I don't think that they know what email is. I mean, they do not do email, right? Texting is the preferred choice. They very rarely will ever pick up the phone and want to talk to anyone between chat and texting. So I think especially important, we always talk about that younger customer or member. If you're not communicating via text, you're going to miss an audience, and you have to be in that channel, but you do have to do it with an organizational wide view.
Yeah. So do you think it's important for banks and credit unions to think of this more like, I hate to use this word holistically, but connected to the larger strategies, marketing, communication, customer experience strategies, and also security strategies as well. Probably like, how does this fit in? Is this just like, okay, now we're going to open up the text messaging silo and just plug away at the text messages?
I'd love to have Sai jump in, but I'll start this. I think, we learned a valuable lesson of like, marketing. I don't know what it's like in other financial institutions. I'm relatively new. This is my first client side role within an FI. So I come from a large background in tech. Marketing for the credit union for us is the tip of the spear on introducing a lot of new technology, new communication. I think if we would have had to do it over again, we would have involved our technology and fraud team earlier on in the discussions, because what felt like a channel for communication for both education and marketing turned into something else. And I know, Sai, you would talk about that. We always say friction between marketing and tech, but I think this is one of those examples where you have to have a good partnership and you need to think through things in advance of rolling something out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with emails and so forth, it's become overwhelming for most folks, right? So this is the next channel. I think is a great channel to get for companies like yours and other institutions to utilize. It's direct, it's personal, it gets right directly to the customer. We still use it for multi-factor authentication, which is a secure method for transferring tokens and authenticating to our systems. Unless somebody finds something better, this is our best kind of our best channel, communication channel for directly touching the customer. It's very personal. I mean, people look at that as Jen stated. People review, look at their phone. I mean, every few minutes. It's personal. I mean, this is where you get your text messages from your mother, your father, and so forth. So it's very trusted, and so it's very direct. I mean, there are some issues with it. I mean, people use it. Scammers use it to phish, to extract information from the customer, but it's still a great way to directly touch the customer.
So Jen, can you talk a little bit about how text messaging can actually work with email to drive better customer engagement?
Yeah, absolutely. This is definitely a preferred channel for engagement, but that doesn't, just as we marketers, we introduce new channels, that doesn't mean our old channels necessarily go away, right? We're trying to engage in multiple channels because potentially something that's preferred for one is not preferred to others. And regardless, you don't want to give up a channel to add a channel, right? You really want to be communicating consistently with a consistent personalized message across the channels that you have. So I would say that if my financial institution sent me a text and I was in the middle of, shopping or, at my son's baseball game, I might look at it and be like, oh, I need to do that, right? But then when I'm online working at night or whatever, I might see the email and be like, oh, yes. So it's really important to stay engaged in all of those channels because we switch from channel to channel. So don't think of it as a replacement. Think about it as an addition. And as you launch any campaign as marketers, we've done this multiple times before. You look at the holistic picture, as Michael said, and you plan out your campaign. What are these touch points? How many times do I communicate via text? How many times do I communicate over email? How many reminders do I send? It's all part of our marketing process that we know today. So I think that's really important.
Well, what kind of information should banks and credit unions be putting in text messages?
Yeah, I think alerts and reminders are really huge, right? When we look at you can only send so much content via a text without it being overwhelming, right? So I think really reminders and alerts. So, hey, here's a reminder, make sure you set up that auto pay on this new account. That's really important. That's a direct impact to me. And there's a timeliness of that. That's a really important thing that I think is a great example of a type of reminder. And then a type of alert, hey, your balance is getting pretty low. Can we help you with that? courtesy pay, overdraft. The email can send them, or that text can send them to a microsite that explains how they can help them, but that's the alert that they get, right?
Right.
To take action, that immediate action, something that they can get in a couple sentences or less. So I would say alerts and reminders.
So bringing the text message in, pulling in that onboarding process. Oh, you didn't set up that auto bill pay. Do you need a deposit alert? Things that maybe you skipped during the onboarding or didn't do. And hey, here's a reminder. So it's really pulling in onboarding to every kind of even more channels to pull the customer back. Because I know one of the things that's a challenge for banks and credit unions is getting customers and members to use their accounts, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I'll just add in, Stessa, I think Jen gave some great examples of kind of the credit union initiating a conversation with your customers or your members or a bank. But, we have also dabbled with our members and customers being able to start a conversation with us via text. So we have rolled out a text to apply capability where someone can start, inquiry about a loan. Now we've actually had to make some changes to that process. We are always compliant and not passing secure information, but we believe, people are on the go. Jen gave the example, it could be a soccer game and it's like, hey, I've been waiting to do something to apply for that. Can I get started? And so I think it's just really important to think of what are the friction points right now that are existing in the journey. And if you look at, some of the disruptors in the space, they started in mobile. They became a mobile-centric platform. They don't have physical locations. Sometimes they have it a little easier. But I think it's important just to make sure that, just like every form of communication, a one-way communication is pretty boring on the other end. So if you start going the route of, I think Jen gave some great examples of start, doing a crawl. When you start walking and running, you have to make sure that your members can use the preferred form of communication to get in touch with you. And that usually, back to Sai's point, opens up discussions with other parts of the organization that are not marketing.
Hi, we have a couple of questions on this as we start to wrap up this part of it. What insight do you have on text versus push notifications? Is one more effective than the other? And are there any concerns with TCPA? So if you want to pick parts of that or all of that, that'd be great.
I'll start. We definitely, so just as if we didn't have enough going on within our credit union, we actually just re-platformed our digital banking solution. And we're very excited about the new opportunities that presents. But I'll just take on the push. And, we haven't really gone into some of the definitions, but just make sure we're talking about it. So what I take the question is, a push notification is typically on a native app. So it's an app that's downloaded, from the Apple Store or from the Google Play Store. And it's a different kind of notification. It looks a lot like a text, but you're taking advantage of someone who has already downloaded a native app. It's on your device, and you get, versus a push text message, you're getting a notification that pops up in app. We are looking at that because of some of the concerns of fraud and smishing that we're just talking about today. That's going to be our desired point going forward. But let me throw a big but, and Sai can talk about this. To have, for me as a mid-sized credit union and most smaller FIs, we use a lot of third parties, right? We don't have the ability to ground up, build our own uniform, core that's tied into our digital banking, that's tied into our messaging platform. So it's very hard to do native integration on some of the things like, for example, fraud alerts. So, I would say long-term, I'm very excited about, what a notification that's in app will bring, because it's much more secure, but it presents challenges to be able to have a partner who's building that digital banking platform to be more open, to allow third parties to integrate. And so I think it's going to be a challenge, Stessa, to be able to do what, for example, the large top 10 banks can do, because they're building their own native app. So I think going back to that, you really have to be able to understand what's capable within the system and build out a roadmap to really understand, what's the important integrations. And I think we are trying to prioritize usability as much as we are trying to do, a functionality. And right now, I do think there's, every study that I see about UX and the winners in the space are really doing a lot to just make sure that their apps and their experience is useful. And I think we do have to get really good at realizing we have a bar that's been set by the big players. They don't want to have multiple apps consumers don't. They want to have one app that controls it all, sort of like the Lord of the Rings, if you're watching that new series come back, one ring to control them all. It is very hard to do in our space to have one app to control it all. So to answer the question directly, I love where push notifications are going in native apps, but it's going to be a challenge for smaller credit unions and mid-sized, banks and credit unions to be able to pull it off.
Okay, great. Jen, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
I just want to go back, if possible, to what Michael said about the two-way communication, because I think that is so important and something that I didn't mention. I'm so glad he mentioned it, because it really is true. It's that no one wants a one-way communication, right? And yes, text message, you can do yes or no communication, but that's not really somebody chatting back with you. And I think that's really important. And just from a technology standpoint, I think there's a lot of AI chatbots that are integrating into text messaging and really helping with some of that front end, common question type communication, which I think is important. And again, that's very similar to what's being done online today. And we're just going to try to bring that into the text world, the mobile world as well. So I think that's really huge to think through that. And I'm so glad Michael brought that up.
Oh, great. And just maybe a couple more questions. What do you think about the use of reminders of current promotions in text messaging? Like if you're having a promotion on car loans, that kind of thing. Do you use it for that at Greater Nevada, for example?
Yeah, so for reasons that I won't go into all of the reasons why, we are not doing a lot of, I would call what you would say broadcast SMS messaging for promotions. We do want to get there. I would just give you my flavor of this. Because of the current environment, and I'm a consumer just like everybody else, I rarely get unsolicited promotions via text from my trusted, like partners, brands that I trust, right? So I think we would use it selectively. I think where you can use SMS text messaging, if you have the technology, is reminders. Like, so for example, I'm very excited, the abandonment rate of a loan application for us, we try to work on that, but a lot of times, especially in a market like today where there's just a lot of demand, I think an appropriate SMS where someone has shown interest or they already have a connection with you. But I think the days of the broadcast sort of like, show up today and get a free whatever. It's like, unless it's a brand down the street that's having a spontaneous kind of like sale, I think as a financial institution, our customers expect us to know them better. So I just think you really have to really know that, going back to what we just talked about, Stessa, you said it so well, our customers really do expect us to know them. And so I think it's really, really important that we practice that in the marketing that we do. So I guess to answer the question directly, we're not doing a lot of broadcast campaigns. We view it as part of the journey, but we would rarely think that we would send something out blanket just because it feels like it's too impersonal.
Right. And this kind of goes to the differentiation around mid-size banks and community banks and credit unions differentiating themselves from larger institutions that can't possibly know much about their customers, so that's really interesting. I'd like to kind of move us now towards, we've been talking about the security aspects and scamming and fraud and stuff like that, and I know that's of no interest to the people on this webinar, but keen interest, because we can't be all roses and unicorns about this, because there are real challenges. I mean, needless to say, we're all in a regulated industry. So let's start off with the basics and define what is smishing.
Yeah, smishing is basically just phishing, but being sent over the SMS channel or text messaging channel, right? It's basically a simple message that basically tries to, convince the end user or the targeted user to click on a link to provide sensitive information, to provide their credentials so that the scammer can utilize that as a way to hack into their various systems or take that information and do, very malicious things with it.
And just to add a little flavor, I think Sai gave a great example, but I would just say, going back to Stessa, maybe to take a question that was coming out of your mouth, but I mean, and these these are very sophisticated. Some of them are rather joking, but they do tend to get, just like anything, right? They go after what works, and because of all the examples that you gave, they know what's being done. They, being the fraudsters, know that there's a lot of alerts that are being sent, like, be concerned, there's a transaction. So I gave a great example, but I mean, I will say, I consider myself to be pretty versed. You look at some of them, and you kind of have to pause and go like, well, what is this, and where did it come from? And so it's getting more and more sophisticated. And I would say this, like what used to be, and there are some things, like used to be misspellings, if they weren't using the terms correctly. We found through direct interaction, as we were making adjustments in messaging, what was going on with a fairly large attack, the fraudsters started changing their tactics, like in midstream. So I think Cy gave a great example, but it is on the rise, and it can be very, very confusing to your members or your customers.
Yeah, and just to add, it's a multi-billion-dollar business for the scammers. I mean, this is what they do. They have their own CTO, they have their own CEO, they have their own organizations that do this as that's their their livelihood.
Yeah,
I mean,
and yeah,
analytics. Yeah, they have analytics, business intelligence on the phone numbers. They extract information from LinkedIn and other resources to combine and to get a better understanding of the end user. So there is a lot of thought into these SMS messages. And they really focus on trying to make sure that you click on that button. And so they do everything possible to make sure it's as real, close to being real as possible. As even to look for neighbors around your area, phone numbers of your neighbors and things like that are close in that area, just to give it some more real, as make it more real to the end user.
Wow. And of course, the FBI in the United States reports that phishing, smishing complaints, this is just the complaints doubled from 2019 to 2020. So this is growing not in increments, but exponentially, right?
It is.
Yeah, and that's data already 2 years, almost 3 years old. So I'm sure it's probably 3 times as bad. That's just the complaints. So, in light of this, like, how can banks and credit unions prevent smishing? Can they prevent smishing?
It's very tough. I mean, but I think it's all through education. I think you have to educate your customers. I think that's the biggest thing. I don't think there's a silver bullet for this. I don't think we have any that can answer this question. It requires that, the banks, care about their customers, understands what their gaps are, and educate the customers. That's what we do as part of our, any corporations. We go through SMS phishing training and so forth to make sure we educate our employees. We have to do the same thing for our customers.
Yeah, so there's nothing actually, obviously, that financial institutions can prevent their people from getting smished on their phones. But how does somebody know that they're getting smished? And I bet maybe this audience might know, people in this audience, but how would the average consumer or even business owner know if they're being smished?
Yeah, and going back to education, I mean, there's a few steps you can take. I mean, the institution should educate their customers on, for example, making sure that their customer understands specifically, what phone numbers could be, is potentially a fraud. Not to provide username and password as a way to the institutions if there's a request for it. If there's anything urgent in the message, I mean, typically it's probably a fake, right? Because I don't think banks and institutions would, require that they have to act immediately for some specific purpose. And sometimes there is, we have to understand, especially sometimes there are messages that are just different and weird and like redemptions and coupons asking, they've won the lottery and things like that. If they're, if it sounds too good, it's probably going to be, it's probably not, so you just have to be very careful. There's other tools that we can utilize. There are tools that you can download to assist with, SMS messaging, but they're not 100% effective. We can report, the scamming phone number to, FTC as a way to blacklist them. And so this way, service providers can blacklist them as they come in. And there are, you can block the phone number. There's a few things you could do, but I think it all comes down to making sure that the customer understands these are the different things that they can do to validate these messages.
Right. But also smishing can happen to an institution as well, isn't that right? I mean, it's attack. They're working multi-channels, if you will.
Oh, absolutely. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
SMS also, they attack employees, they attack executives. There's spear phishing, which is basically targeted a specific, the senior management team to extract information. There's different ways that they utilize these different channels.
Wow.
Combination of just email and SMS and voice messaging as well. Just voice messages. So there's different ways they attack you, and it's a multi-layered attack when it's sophisticated enough.
Interesting, but they can attack institutions per se, and I think that was the case with Greater Nevada.
Yeah, I'll take size. That was a great setup. One thing I will say, just to kind of like underline a key point, because as Sai brought it up, is the concept of education. And I think the biggest messaging that we feel as an institution, and I'll explain my story of what we went through, is really encourage your members to slow down and to pause. And I know that seems kind of common sense, but that concept of slowing down and pausing, we just gave all these stats about instantaneous communication, and we complete transactions in seconds and we want to get off, right? That is the psychology of text messaging, right? It seems really easy and we're used to it. So I think that's just the number one thing. So I gave some great points, but I think, as an industry, we really need to go out with a message that just says, like, to our customers, slow down. Yes, it is banking, it's important, but don't act on something until you really stop and go through like the assessment as like, do I have a relationship with this institution? Was I in the course of doing something that makes sense that they would reach out to me? And if the answer to those, first two are suspicious, then, train your customers or members to go to a website that is a legitimate website, call in and take the pause. So I think those are just like some key messages, because I think, Stessa, this is my takeaway. Sai gave some great examples. These tactics are changing so much that consumers can't keep up with them. As financial institutions, we have to, but it would be almost impossible to give the Bible and verse, so to speak, of everything that a consumer needs to do to be able to do that. So let me tell you our story. So I'm gonna sanitize it a little bit, but this was a real issue, and I would say, if you don't have smishing as part of your crisis communications plan, everybody that's listening to this call should. And I mean that, we probably have data breach and everything else, but let me give you an example of, if it's not necessarily we had anything go on in our institution that was a data breach or any data was compromised. This was a pure outside threat, a bad agent that started using a brand name, our brand name, in a very large text fraud that was going on throughout the entire state of Nevada. These were tens of thousands of messages, and we are aware that something was going on, and I'll share. I got one, and it paused me because I was in the course of doing something, and I was like, well, what is this? I kind of let it, ignore it, went in over the weekend, and we went like, wow, we know that something is unusual, because I started having friends in the community go like, why are you text messaging me? I'm not even a member. And I started like going like, oh yeah, we know this is going on. So we enacted some discussions, but I will say in a lesson learned, we started really going into understanding, what was the threat. We tried to make sure that we were mitigating any impact to our brand and our reputation in the community, because when you go out and you start saying, hey, there's a scam going on that's utilizing the name of your institution, a lot of people will not pay attention to that, and they'll go like, oh, was there a data breach? And so we just kind of assessed everything and went, we don't feel like getting out into the fray of this. Made sense right at the gate to go public. We did start letting our members know, but one of the areas that I would just say, back to calling your communications team together when you have this happen, is to make sure that there isn't an impact happening in one part of the organization that you're not aware of. So the one area that we really felt that we could do a better job in the future is really understanding where our members actually being disproportionately targeted through this. So what I mean by that is, we had our own members falling prey to the scam that had nothing to do with the fact that they were being targeted because our members. They just were targeted, to Sai's point, because they were consumers. So we had a disproportionate amount of members that were clicking on these links, and they were going in and they were needing to open accounts again. And that information, we kind of knew it was happening, but it didn't get quickly enough to the front of the marketing train. So again, I just would say, if you do see your brand name of your institution, if you're a known name, this happened to some of the larger FIs, right? Wells has been used before, Best Buy is a common known scam, but we would have thought, would we be on the radar screen? Yes, we're the largest, credit union in our state, but we didn't really view it as something that we needed to be concerned on. So we enacted a plan, and just to explain what happened, this was starting in April of 2022, so April of this year. We enacted proactive communication, but we quickly made the assessment that a better strategy to educate the public was to bring in a third party, because we felt as though the measures that we were taking to protect ourselves was going to quickly turn the fraudsters onto another institution. So we actually reached out to our Attorney General's office, and I encourage you, if you don't have your Attorney General of your state on good relationship to build. And we had worked in the past, and we actually enacted our credit union league. So we have the Nevada Credit Union League, and we quickly reached out and said, look, we feel like this is something that the league needs to take on. And within the course of 2 weeks, we were able to get a press event together with our Attorney General, Aaron Ford. It was down in Southern Nevada. And we basically turned it into not necessarily only about the instance that was happening. We were part of it, but it was really more of a, hey, consumers need to be aware that this is going to be an increasing tactic. So we do think that was effective. By the time that all happened, it was about a month between when incident happened to when we had the press event. We definitely saw the threats go down, but it didn't stop entirely. And then the other thing that we had to do, so I just want to talk operationally, marketing, and we talk about silos, typically for a mid-sized institution like ours or a smaller FI, the amount of team members that are assigned to fraud and responding to fraud requests, right? That's a small team. When you go from like 5 calls a day to 500, that's an incredibly difficult thing. And so we got the request, we need help, right? We need to let people know, don't call in and leave a voicemail, we can't get back to them. But and I want to credit my marketing manager at the time, it's a fantastic, smart mind, but we got the request to turn off the forum, and like, can we actually just stop having people call us? And we're like, well, wait a minute, we don't want to do that. So we use technology, and now we have, as part of an ongoing fraud reporting, somebody can go and report fraud and actually send us a screenshot of the actual attempt. And just that little nuance of being able to use intel, we were quickly able to let members know, and our customers know, as long as you didn't go click on the link, you're fine. You don't need to call us. Your account's not in trouble. But we got that intel about what was happening, and we were able to make pivots in our communication and our messaging. So again, I just want to say this was not fun. This was a lot of late nights. It was a lot of stress. It was a lot of, as a marketer, as a communications professional, you have to stop and go like, okay, let's keep all of this in mind. I would just encourage, anybody watching this webinar to go through scenarios, plan out what ifs, get it written down so that, when this happens, it's something that you're prepared to do. And again, I think it's going to require multiple departments. It's not just marketing and communication. I mean, this was everything from our C-suite to our fraud department, to our operations, to our call center, and getting everybody comfortable that this is going to be something you might have to face is important.
And this is a question that we got from folks on the webinar. Did that change your approach to how you use text messages, the smishing, or
I would love to say it didn't, Stessa, but let me be real. Yeah, it did.
No,
it did.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
So basically one of the, and again, this is all well-intentioned, right? But, people that come from a fraud prevention or risk mitigation are going to want to do the best they can to completely eliminate risk. So we caught some messaging that was going to be proposed to go out to say, we'll never send you a URL that you should click on in a text message. And we actually had to pause and go like, well, that's not accurate. We do that sometimes. And so I think the key here, back to, did it change our strategy? It made us really stop and go, what we say in this moment of crisis, even though it might stop the fraud, we have to make sure that it's not going to have a long-term impediment to our ability to use text messaging, right? And so, yes, we can say things like, we're never going to ask you for personal information. We're going to ask you to log into your digital banking platform and authenticate. But again, think about just in this conversation of like, you may get a text message that looks like us. That's message number 1, be aware. Then you go and you say, don't click on a link. Oh, wait a minute, we can't say that. So like, you really start getting to the point where you're like, man, what can I communicate to my customers here that doesn't make it look like we're saying, one of my kids' favorite movies, Chicken Little from Disney, the sky is falling, right? It's like, how do you communicate in an effective way? So I guess yes, it made us pause and make sure that we said, like, we have to thread this needle to make sure that we're not going to have a long-term impact. Now, I will say there are some things that this is done best practices. We can talk at the end. We had some other platforms that we were considering rolling out. When we mapped out this experience, lined it into a digital banking conversion where we were rolling out some new security measures, it pushed some of our roadmap farther out because we just felt like, man, our members, our customers are going to get too much information, too short. We have to get them some time to catch up to what we've gone through in this experience.
Well, kind of just picking up the little thread of the URL, is there anything that financial institutions can do to make that URL safer to click on? I mean,
yeah, so I will say the short answer, and I want Sai to chime in here, there really is not a lot. So let me give you an example. So what we found when we were going through the, sorry, my phone is ringing, I didn't have it turned off. What we found, that was a scammer, by the way, just kidding, I was calling me, but what we found is that in the attack that we had, there were probably no less than 100 different URLs that were used at different points during the fraud. Some of them were ridiculous. I think one of them did actually have unicorn in the URL. It was something unicorn or something. So these tactics, to make sure everybody understands the technical nature, is they're constantly being forced to change the bait, right? And the bait is a URL, but they are more sophisticated of locking in like lookalike URLs or like-minded domains. And I do think, you know, as an advocate here, I've been in technology for over 20 years. It's too easy to get a domain. It really is. I mean, there needs to be more authentication and requirements around, you know, what it is. It's really easy to go secure one. They do some level of authentication and going through it, but it's still way too easy to pop those up. We actually utilize a technology, and they're another partner of ours. It's a technology called Fish Labs, and they're a third-party platform. I won't go into all of it. It could be a whole nother webinar, but you should look into, if you don't work with Fish Labs or another provider, what they are is basically a reputation management and security platform that looks for where these phishing scams are online, and they actually help you, one, identify them, and then go and work with the you know, the international registries of domains and get those fraudster domains shut down. So that was incredibly important. So again, you know, we had SysOps, we had our security team. It was a partnership to get this to come out. And again, I will be completely transparent. You will not possibly think through as an FI, if you've not gone through this, all the different touch points, but I'm giving you the areas to think about it. Like, you know, this really needs to be part of a plan. It needs to be an operational plan. And if you're not thinking about it, you should, because again, if you're even any kind of a known reputation and brand, to Sai's point, you could have a small team of 10 people that feel like they've got a vulnerability, and they can cause a lot of chaos in a very short amount of time.
Sai, did you want to follow up with anything? I'm sorry.
No, Mike gets spot on. I mean, I think there's a lot of different groups that needs to be involved. I mean, as part of the security team, the incident response team needs all to be involved in this, because there's a lot of pieces to this. It's very difficult, you know, attack to address, because there are just so many components. And just, you know, like with phishing emails and SMS, it's very difficult to determine specifically if these URLs or these messages are fake or not. It's extremely difficult. They've gotten so good at it that it looks so real. And I mean, I know some of the smartest people who you know, who clicked on links. So it has, again, it goes back, going back to education again, and making sure that the customer understands that. It goes back to the, you know, there are questionable, you know, SMS messages. They should go to the website, making sure it's, you know, that information is very clear on the website to say, okay, here's our phone number, here's our type of messaging and so forth. Here's our privacy policy and things like that. I think that would be very helpful.
So literally what you're saying is that, you know, part of the customer process, if they're not sure, is to just call and say, hey, did you guys send out a text message? So the customer service people need to know what's been sent out and say, you know what? No, we didn't send out a message that says that.
Yeah, and it's got to be very easy. It's got to be very easy to the customer. They got to really, I mean, it's got to be so easy that, okay, they know, you know, what type of messages they're going to get, and it can't be hidden in the pages. It's got to be very clear.
Right, and probably not 5 levels of menu on the phone call tree to get the answer. Just asking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That no, I think that makes sense, and it's a sticky security issue, because the financial institution cannot control it as much as you would like. People like it, and they can't even control it, even though the device is kind of in their hands. So so we've had the rose-colored glasses, and now we've had the hard, cold wash of reality. And maybe folks on the webinar have gotten a few text messages from their doctors confirming appointments or upcoming appointments, and it's time to say, hey, so for financial institutions, for the people who work at the credit unions and banks who are on this webinar, what are some of the best practices when it comes to texting members and customers? Let's start with Jen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Michael and Sai said it too, and I'm just going to reiterate it because I think it's super, super important is the education part. You know, as a marketer, we've done this before as well, right? I remember launching LinkedIn at a corporation, and it was the same type of thing, right? It's granted, there might not have been so much fraud and smishing, you know, but it's really it's the checklist of, okay, if we're going to launch this new channel, what are the steps that we need to take in order to do so, and let's get that list together like any launch, right, of a new product, new platform. We're used to these things as marketers. Get your list together. It's a go-to-market strategy, right? Get your list together, make sure that you have the right work streams internally, you have the right people involved, and you have that game plan. I think that's super, super important on top of the education. The education is so important. And again, this is not something that we're not used to. We've launched products into market before. We've launched services. We've changed, you know, digital conversions. Education is key when you're launching something new. And I think that's really important, and not to get so overwhelmed. Just take a step back, say, what are the things we need to do to launch this? And let's get the right people involved to do so.
And Jen, those were great. I think there's just, if I could just punctuate something you said about education, you know, the one area too that we got very excited about, and it's going to continue to be a cornerstone of our communication, is, you know, if you really look at the mission of credit unions and community banks and really all financial institutions, right? It's an incredibly disruptive event to have your account hacked, or, you know, to shut down your bank accounts. It's very, challenging, but, you know, if you really look at it, and all of us know stories, right, working in credit unions of members who have lost life savings because of falling, victim to fraud. So I would just say, for me, this experience, it always was top of mind, but I think you do have to double down as an industry around, partnerships and making sure that we do educate it. And specifically what Jen was saying, I think education is different. We have debated using social media, specifically Instagram and, even TikTok as to go through as a way to say, how could we educate younger members, younger customers to actually have conversations with their parents or grandparents? And I don't want to sound ageist, because there are some amazing folks that fit a demographic of senior citizen that are incredibly tech savvy, but we have to realize they're disproportionately more susceptible members of the community, and sort of like, well, where do you have that conversation? So for us, yes, we are going to try to reach out directly to our members, but we have to sort of remind ourselves as we went through this, influencers are incredibly important. And so if you could just have a talk with your grandparent or your parents to be like, if you start having a weird conversation, can you just let me know? Like, don't be afraid to have those conversations. The other thing, which is human nature, but this is really important as well as a key unlock. Sai said something earlier about we can all fall victim to it. Sometimes members don't want to admit that they might have actually clicked on a link and done something that was nefarious. So we actually sometimes have to go and say, like, well, did you click on the link? Did you do anything? And they go, no. And then we actually go and find out, well, they did. So I think we do have to make sure that we are showing up, right, as part of our brand, is just like to be like, it's not embarrassing, but the sooner we know, you have to let us know so we can do the protective, things that we need to do to secure your account. So, I mean, there's a lot packed into it, but you start, if I add it up, right, we talked literally like this is a psychology lesson, urgency, embarrassment, gratification. I mean, there's a lot of things at play here. And to Sai's point, the fraudsters know how to use that to their advantage. So again, keep in mind, it's not going to be enough just to simply put a post out and say, we're done, we did it. It's like, are we actually going and reaching out to communities and figuring out partnerships with like local community centers, senior centers, that we're going to actually create content and put on events that will actually, hopefully allow those individuals to really be protecting themselves. That's the bottom line I took away from all of this.
Right.
Our members and our customers are the first line of defense. That's the sad reality. No matter what we do from a technology, they have to be the front line to put a lot of this to stop. And the only way they're going to get there is to make them feel supported by us, that we understand it, and we're giving them the tools to protect themselves.
Yeah, and maybe some people who the text message just makes them so nervous, they should opt out, and maybe making that possible and easy for them to opt out any way they want would also be another best practice, if you will. It's easy to get in, but can you get out easily too? I was recently told by one of my bank relationships, I have to go to a branch to change a password. And since they recently closed the branch nearest to me, that made me unhappy. And I'm sure this, going to a branch is a crazy thing for dealing with electronics. What do you think, Sai, about having all text messages from the bank come from one number? So the customer or the member could save that number and know that if their bank is texting them from another number, that it's fraudulent. Is that a viable thing?
Yeah, I think it's a great approach. It's a great whitelist. It's a whitelist approach, which means that you have a trusted phone number that you receive these messages from. It's a great way to do it. It just comes back to, there's a technology supported to be able to push out that many texts on a specific line. That's a technology issue, but I think it's a great approach. They do that with networks all the time. With networks where we have a trusted domain that comes and connects to our systems, it's a great way to set a list of trusted numbers. I mean, you have a white list of trusted numbers, a great way to address smishing.
Okay, interesting.
And Stessa, you may have had to
sure.
just to underline what Sai was saying, that is a best practice. So like, if I'm a concert fan, so I will give credit to like a platform like Ticketmaster, right, that delivers text messaging. One of the things that happens, right, Apple is so good at this, right? When you get a new phone, all of your SMS history follows you onto a new phone. And so when you're getting confirmations of like Ticketmaster, like, your Pearl Jam tickets are about to go on sale, would you find out, you look and you see the same string of communication, it's trusted, right? So I think a lot of this, what I think Sai just said, is like, sometimes, practice it yourself, figure out what works well for you, share that with your technology team, and get brainstorming on like, well, how could we do this? And I do want to give credit, Digital Onboarding and other partners, it's challenging to me coming from tech, how hard it is to find at times very innovative partners. But like when we brought this issue up, Digital Onboarding was quick to say, yeah, we'd love to partner and pilot with you about how we could send all of our text through a dedicated SMS. Now we've gone to other of our partners and that's on the roadmap in 3 years. And so it's like, you have to, when you're selecting technology partners, you really have to make sure you're going with a partner that has a good roadmap and really vet that this is possible. Because, if your fraud and your card activation and your onboarding are not all talking, even something as easy as opting out can be very challenging. Like if you opt out of digital onboarding and you don't have a data policy that transfers that information back to the core, what did they just opt out of? Are they opting out of everything? And so I just think it's important to go through this process, and SMS is incredibly powerful. But what I've found is that a lot of organizations my size have just not thought through it holistically. And I think the way to get there is to really put yourself in the seat of your customer or your member. And if you do what's right for them, you do sort of have to hold your technology partners that you're paying good funds to deliver a good experience. You have to hold them accountable to deliver the technology you need.
So do we think that banks and credit unions should first make this part of the onboarding process, or can they move forward before they do that? And I'm gonna pick on Jen for this.
In which piece, Stessa?
Well, I mean, for setting up, getting started with text messaging, should the first thing be to put it in the onboarding piece, or can you start to roll out text messaging while you may still be dealing with that issue?
Yeah, I think I mean, it all goes back to what are your highest priorities and what are you trying to communicate and when. If it aligns with your onboarding, fantastic. I think these are, the reminders and alerts when you're setting up an account, and those steps that are so critical that have impact on a consumer if they don't do it in a timely manner. I think those are really important components of adding text messages. So do I think it's fantastic to add that into your rollout of onboarding? Absolutely. Do you need that? Not necessarily, but I think that that's a really great step in the right direction. As as Michael said, don't be blasting text messages, but start, I think it's really important to start with reminders and alerts, and that's onboarding is a perfect place to do so.
Yeah. So before you roll out your first message, even, you should collect opt-ins and consents, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think opt-in and opt-out is super important. And I forget who said it, and I apologize. I think it was Michael, and Sai actually, I believe, said it as well. When you're communicating in multiple channels, it's really important to think what is the source of truth for opt-in and opt-out. And it's really important that first you have the tool to be able to say whether they're opting into email, whether they're opting into text, verifying that they are who they are to opt into that text. And also make sure that you're updating whatever you're saying is your source of truth for that critical element of opting in and opting out. You cannot text somebody if they've opted out. So you have to think through, if I'm engaging through multiple channels, where is my source of truth for that opt-out? And when I say source of truth, like a system, a field somewhere, what's going to say that they're opting out of text versus opting out of email versus opting out of a service, as Michael mentioned. It's really important to think through those important things and make sure you have the tools to make that easier for you.
Yeah. I have another bank that identifies my primary phone number as my mobile number. Guess what? It's a landline. They've been sending messages to it. Okay, I mean, thinking through that process and where the data is coming from and what you're identifying, I think is really, really important before you go out, even with great messages. Where do you see the role of planning and your objectives, your marketing communications objectives, and planning that and building out your text messaging, especially your first text messages?
Yeah, I think Jen said it well. I know we're kind of getting near time here. I just want to say, first of all, just a compliment. Thanks to Digital Onboarding for doing this. I want to make sure, you can see the passion in my statements here. I do think as an industry, we do need to collaborate. I left out an important factor when we did that press conference. We actually involved the Nevada Bankers Association in the event. So I do think, as an industry, we need to forget credit unions and banks and neo banks and fintechs. As an industry, protecting the most sacred data and technology of our members and customers, it's their financial data. Like, we have to come together as an industry and work better together. To answer your question directly, where do you start? I do think it goes back to everything that we see when we do our own surveys and look at our brand strength. People want easy. And easy is getting to be the norm. And so, Stessa, yes, you have to start with what will we use text messaging to do to make the lives of our members easier. I really don't think you should plan communication on solving your own objectives. You have to look at it from a standpoint of what problem are you trying to solve for your member or your customer, and provide communication that adds to their process. And, so many examples of how that's done, but, the pandemic did a lot of things, but it introduced a lot of new technology to a lot of segments of the community. I mean, you look at just how many people in their family had family members do grocery online for the first time during the pandemic, and why do you ever go back? So I think this is here to stay. I know I gave maybe a story that made some people pause. You can't avoid this, but if you do it with a good partner, you do it with, that's both internal and external to your org, and you start, really thinking through what do you want to have your members or your customers experience. I think text messaging is an incredibly powerful platform, but it requires a lot of thought.
And Sai, could you want to give some final words on what you see as best practices from a security?
Yeah, from an end user perspective, I think everyone needs to be alert, right, in terms of what messages they're getting. I think, as Michael said, they need to pause, look at it, and analyze the message, make sure it looks safe, There are resources out there for you to assess the message via, like Fish Lab is one of them. There's websites. The FCC has their website list of bad actors and scam emails and phone numbers and so forth. So utilize those resources, right? So this way, you're clicking on these things, well educated.
Okay, great. And just to wrap up with some summary points of what we talked about here today is that text messaging is a first step in personalizing communications with your customers and members. It's not subtracting from your other channels, your other means of marketing communications, but it's additive. You must tell your customers and members what to expect in terms of text messages from your institutions, some consistency on the phone number that you're using, consistency on URLs, following what you've told your customers and members to expect is probably also good. Easy opt-in and opt-out. Taking baby steps in terms of using text messages. You certainly, along with your broader communications strategy and roadmap so that you can avoid yourselves as an institution getting overwhelmed with this new, well, not necessarily new channel, but new to you for marketing and communications. Smishing is going to continue to hit your institutions and your customers and members, whether or not you use text messaging to communicate and interact and drive more engagement with them. One role the FI can play is as that of a trusted advisor, to tell your customers and members what the problems are, how to protect themselves, whether it's offline in an in-person, educational interactive session so that people become less afraid, or it's, embedding this help and this information and these guidelines on websites and onboarding process throughout the customer's interaction with the financial institution. Identifying all the risks and benefits before you move forward can help you address the actual risks that you need to address before you take your first steps. And certainly working with providers, we mentioned a few, including the sponsor today, Digital Onboarding, who can help you incorporate all these best practices into your onboarding, your cross-sell, upsell, and other kinds of functionality in your digital banking solutions is critical to successfully deal with the ongoing threat, but also increasing the benefits to your customers and members, because that's really what it's all about. We still have a bunch of questions. I don't know if we have any more time to take them now, but we can answer them and post more information. So I want to thank,
Yeah, this is Laurie McLachlan again. I just wanted to pipe in and thank our audience for attending. You will receive a recording of the session by the end of the week. We're going to include a couple of extra resources so that you can see more of what Greater Nevada did to both educate their members and how they worked with the Attorney General Office. And lastly, you can always email us at sales@digitalonboarding.com if you've got any other questions. But thank you to our panelists, Michael, Cy, and Jen, and huge thanks to our moderator, Stessa Cohen. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.